ever feel like you're chasing a moving target, or like being good enough always feels like it's just out of reach? I get it. Growing up with a father who was an addict, losing a parent at a young age, and battling obsessive compulsive disorder throughout my life has taught me much about shame, guilt, and always trying to be good enough. But what if being good enough is a myth? What if your worth is not something to chase or try to measure up to? This is the Enough Effect podcast, a space to rewrite the narrative, share stories, and discover the power of being you exactly as you are. I'm so excited right now. It is officially episode 5 of the Enough Effect. I am Abby Tabilos. This is an important episode to me because officially the Enough Effect has been a thing for an entire month. I am so excited. At the time of filming this episode, I've only released 2. I'm gonna release a 3rd one today. And I got an email last night that my podcast has 25 downloads. And that felt like a pretty big milestone. It felt like something to celebrate. So if you are one of those people who has downloaded, thank you so much. This is my dream. It's my passion project. I love sharing what I've learned in my life to help as many people as I can. So thank you for empowering me and listening to what I have to say and the stories that I have to share. It just means the world. This episode is very important to me, and I'm also going to be bringing up a topic that I haven't yet addressed, which, again, this is episode 5, so there's a lot of topics I haven't addressed. The idea for this episode actually happened when I was at a meeting for my church, and it just spurred this whole thought process. It's something that's been on my mind anyway, because as I've been writing my memoir, which I don't think I've mentioned that on my podcast yet either, but if this is your first time hearing it, yes, I am working on a memoir. I'm on draft 4. I've been working on it for years. I've had the idea since I was like 17, and I'm on my way to being 28. I've been seriously, actually dialed in writing almost every day for about 2 years now, and I hope to get it done as soon as I can, but I'm really just taking my time and trying to make it the best and as helpful as I can. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for my newsletter. Just go to abbytabilos.com and it will pop up at the very bottom of the page. But in the same vein as my memoir, a big component of my memoir involves something I have not brought up on this podcast, except for in the intro, I guess, and that is that I did grow up with a father who was an addict. Alcoholism was his biggest vice, but he also struggled with drugs, and it was a battle for him. Obviously, he did pass away, as I mentioned also in the introduction, when I was very freshly 18 years old. And as I've been writing my memoir and about those experiences growing up and what it was like, and also dabbling into my experiences with OCD and anxiety and other mental health challenges, I have drawn some similarities between OCD and addiction that I had never thought about before. And that's just the beauty of writing a memoir, is that you really take a step back and see things from a different perspective. But I don't think this applies just to OCD and addiction. I think it applies to a lot of mental health disorders, and that is that there is a very large component of shame within so much of the suffering that comes from mental health conditions. I feel like a lot of the time the root is shame. I know, speaking from my experiences with OCD, a lot of shame comes from, especially as you try and get more serious about recovery, you feel really shameful when you relapse, if you will, when you get sucked back into the OCD cycle, or you give into a compulsion, or get stuck into a thought loop and start ruminating about an intrusive thought. You do feel a bit of shame because you're like, I know better, I should be doing better by now. Or you even can just feel shame when you have a mental health condition because you feel like a burden on other people. I know that that's a huge pain point and fear for so many different people, is just that fear of feeling like a burden. And when watching my dad struggle with addiction throughout his life, he had so much shame surrounding his relapses and surrounding if he was able to be the kind of father that he wanted to be. So there's so many different components to the whole thing. So the question is, if so many people are struggling with shame, how do you deal with it? What do you do about it? Because shame is so icky and so heavy and so powerful, in a sense that it can manipulate you and change your whole day based off of just one emotion. And I can't speak for other people's experiences, but I can speak for my experiences with scrupulosity OCD in particular, and also watching my father battle his addiction for many years of my life. And I know that those experiences are very applicable to a lot of people listening because there's great power in stories. And so, that being said, I think it's important to acknowledge, that shame that comes up with different mental illnesses. A lot of times it motivates you or leads you to do a specific action. And with scrupulosity OCD, a lot of times that shame leads you to seek forgiveness from God or try to make up for your perceived mistakes in the form of confession or doing extra cleansing rituals or whatever it might be. The shame really just comes from always wanting to make sure that you're in God's good graces. I was thinking about that a lot when I was at church one Sunday. Shortly after my diagnosis, going to church was a huge struggle for me. It was very triggering. It just felt like I was sitting on the pew just like constantly stressed and worried about my standing with God, and every time someone said like, oh, we should serve others, my brain would just freak out that I was gonna go to hell because I wasn't serving people as much as I should be when I was literally barely drowning and struggling to even say a prayer at the time. So it was very overwhelming. And somebody was giving a talk or a speech during one of the meetings one time, and they were telling a story about how one of their very young daughters was in a drowning accident. There was a whole lot of complications with her health, obviously, afterwards, and she was rushed and life-flighted to the hospital, and they weren't sure if she was going to make it, and if she did wake up, they weren't sure if she was going to have significant brain damage or what her life would look like once she woke up. And the speaker was just explaining that in that situation, the uncertainty of if our daughter does wake up, what will things look like for her? The only thing that they cared about and the only thing that they wanted and yearned for the most was having their daughter back in any condition. And what the speaker said has stuck with me for all these months. The speaker said, we would take our daughter in any condition. We just want our daughter back. It was a very heartwarming story, not only because, of course, the daughter woke up and they're living a happy life together as a family now, but also because I think that when you kind of take that story and flip it on its head and apply it to different situations, there's a lot to learn about that sentiment of loving someone and what it means. I don't care what condition you're in. I just want you in my life and I need you in my life. And here's my takeaway from that story. And I'm gonna say it in a bit of a blunt way, but I wrote down, can't we choose to believe that God is so much more compassionate than we might initially think that he is? And if you're not someone who's religious, can't you choose to believe that you are so much more compassionate towards yourself than you might initially be inclined to be or believe that you are? And if you're an addict like my father, can't you choose to or come to believe that your family is so much more compassionate than you might think that they are, and that when you relapse, they just want you to be okay and to come back, and they will take you in any condition? I think that all of us want to belong somewhere. There's communities, and there's also just belonging to yourself and being compassionate with yourself and loving yourself and just being able to look in the mirror and say, it doesn't matter what condition I'm in, I love myself. I want to spend my life with myself. I respect my journey and who I am and where I've come from. And then the blessing of loving other people that much, and then believing in a God who loves us that much. Because with all of these different mental health conditions, I think the root of that shame is that I am not worth belonging anywhere because I struggle too much, or I let people down too much, or I am a burden. But we often forget that we are worth being taken back or taken in or loving in any condition. And it's a short message, but it's a message that I wanted to share with you today, just as a reminder that just as that couple would take their daughter back in any condition, if you have scrupulosity OCD, so will your God. If you are an addict, so will your family. If you struggle with loving yourself, accept yourself in any condition, because all of us have been in bad conditions, and I I'm using air quotes for those of you that aren't on the video version of this podcast when I say a bad condition, but just choosing a more compassionate and loving perspective is so empowering and so important. And I think that it's one that we often forget to do. So here's my loving reminder to do that this week. As always, if you're struggling to believe in yourself or you feel like no one else believes in you, just know that I do. And I believe that everyone has a future where things don't feel excruciatingly hard. So keep going and remember to be compassionate to yourself this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening to the Enough Effect podcast. If you enjoyed listening, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment your favorite thing from today's episode. Plus, don't forget to hit up my social media at abstabs, ABSTABBS on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook for daily inspirational content to remind you that you can live a life built upon the resounding belief that being good enough was never an endeavor worth pursuing. Lastly, check out my show notes for any resources mentioned in this episode and my website, where you can find a list of all the ways I would love to work with you. See you next week, and don't forget that you are and always have been more than enough.